Before we go into playoff week content, it is 1,000,000% worth mentioning how much of an overachievement this is for the Carolina Panthers. 8-9, 9 schmate, whatever it is, they're in the playoffs, they're ahead of schedule, and I was optimistic in the offseason, but really, if you told me this team would be in the playoffs, no matter how they got there, I think most people would think you're crazy, and particularly those wearing suits on Mint Street. A coach is always going to set the bar high and try to win week in and week out, but I think if you're being honest, if Tepper, if Dan Morgan, if some of the Panthers' suits are being honest with themselves, they didn't expect the playoffs way ahead of schedule. And I'm going to pull the clip that I reference all the time on this show. Dan Morgan in his press conference before training camp. It's a very common standard press conference across football, but I thought his statement really stuck out when he was setting the goals for the Panthers going into the season. And he's surprised. He's surprised as anyone else, as we all are. And going back to week 1, you have to trade, begrudgingly, your number 1 wide receiver over the past 2 seasons. You roll out this really young, inexperienced, raw receiving core. You have a quarterback who's a developmental project who still is trying to strike consistency at the pro level, working on getting acclimated to the pro game. You have a young core on defense. Yes, you have superstars playing like all pros. J.C. Horn and the man who got snubbed like no one else for the Pro Bowl, Derek Brown. But largely, you look at guys like Lathan Ransom on the field. Princely Umanmielen, who is getting reps at points. Hell, you had DJ Johnson at edge one game against the Patriots. And, of course, you got blown out that game. You've had young players all over the place. You've had placeholders, guys like Nick Scott playing safety. A lot of people, they wouldn't be crazy, myself included, to say that this was going to be a bridge year. It was supposed to be a bridge year. And yes, of course, the Panthers are a boy amongst men in the NFL playoffs. They're waiting for their armpit hair to grow as they sit on the varsity bench. Of course, that's who they are. But still, don't let that direct your attention away. And I know a lot of people have talked about this. There's a very grateful bunch of people that listen to this program. Recognizing that this is an amazing overachievement. An amazing overachievement for the Carolina Panthers, who now find themselves going into the playoffs with a freaking home game against the Los Angeles Rams. Well, let's hear from Dan Morgan. This was Dan Morgan's statement going into the season about the purpose the Panthers had in 2025.
This season, our goals are clear. Improve our consistency, develop our young core, have our vets lead the way, and compete every week with a relentless team-first mindset. We're committed to playing disciplined, physical football and creating a culture of high character and resilience. I have full confidence in our players, coaches, and staff to rise to the occasion. Together, along with ownership empowerment, we aim to build a foundation for long-term success while putting in the work and earning our arrival. With that said, I'll open it up to any questions.
Yes. Had to include Mike K asking a question in ceremonious fashion at the end of that clip. I didn't cut it out for a reason, but it was important that we revisit that because that was a scripted press statement. So this was the start of minicamp. Every GM does a speech like this. They don't all script something, though. So you had writers, the social media team, everyone working on this, whoever writes for the Panthers and Panthers.com. And particularly, I'm sure, Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, all the big dogs, David Tepper, Canales, maybe Evero if they listen to him. They all collaborated on that statement, we presume, which is this was a long-term project. And Morgan caught criticism during that press conference for not even using the word win. So they script this whole release, and he didn't even include winning as a goal. It was instill the culture, improve consistency, find who we are, return to this team, run the ball, stop the run, find who we are as the Panthers. Develop the young core, these young guys that you're putting out on the field. Nick Scorton, Uman Mielen, who's been on the field less and less, but Lathan Ransom, McMillan if you're on the offensive side of the ball, Mitchell Evans, Trevor Etienne, whoever it is, you have a young core, develop them. No one thought, even though you're 8-9, 8-9, 9-8, whatever, I was pissed about the Bucs game. I can't deny that. I wish they won it and went 9-8. Of course, I'm upset about that. I wish they had a clean above 500 record, of course, but they're in the playoffs. They've overachieved. The projection of wins for the Panthers, according to major betting outlets, was 6.5 going into the year. They have 8. They have 8. And it's not 12 wins. They're not the Pats going from worst to first or worst to second in the FC. But they don't have a generationally good quarterback and a generationally good coaching staff and things like that. They don't have those things working for them. They didn't spend $200 million on the first day of free agency. And the Patriots literally did that. So this story is one that is on the rise for the Panthers. And it's a huge moment for them. I think this game against the Rams, who really are a team that I think is beatable. It was between the Niners and the Rams. I'm glad it's the Rams. Now, of course, McVay is as good as they come. Is he going to lose twice to the Panthers? It's tough to argue yourself into. But let's flash back to 2010 when Dave Canales was hired as the offensive quality control coach in Seattle. Dan Morgan, his playing days just ended. He joined the Seahawks in 2010 under John Snyder as an intern. And this is the analogy that I think is so gold. Mike Kay's been talking about it. I talked about it a few weeks ago because I used it in reference to the Seahawks game. I'm like, they're going to have a really good game against the Seahawks because of Morgan and Canales' background in that organization. Well, another prediction of mine that was wrong, but in 2010, you have a young Dave Canales and a young Dan Morgan joining that Seahawks organization. And you know they say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. As I had chicken pasta and broccoli for dinner last night. My parents fed me that growing up. And now Canales and Morgan find themselves in a similar situation to what they had when they were growing up, which is their first year in Seattle, the Seahawks went 7-9, made the playoffs, and the infamous Beastquake run, Marshawn Lynch throwing Darren Sharper out of the club, going for a long running touchdown, and the Seahawks win in upset fashion in the wild card round at home. This catalyzed the moment in which the Seahawks went from, the Seahawks, like, people don't pay them much attention, to, in 2012, they're 11-5 in the playoffs. 2 years later, 2013, they're 13-3. They have Russell Wilson now, and they're winning the Super Bowl. And now the Seahawks are premier team, super passionate fan base. And I think Tepper, I know they hired Canales as the quarterback whisperer, but also it is impossible to dismiss the structure of the Seahawks organization, how the Panthers are building their organization with Canales being the king's hand to Tepper, but also Dan Morgan. And Pete Carroll came into the league in Seattle. Rather, he got the job in Seattle. And not only was he the coach, he was also the executive vice president of football operations. So a little bit of an analysis, deep nuance there, but I think the Panthers are building a similar thing. And the collaboration and camaraderie and prior working relationship that Morgan and Canales had was 100%. And Panthers.com didn't get they reported this when they hired Canales, that they wanted two guys, Canales and Morgan, who were in it together. And it's impossible not to read into that Seahawks moment, a championship moment that the Panthers are going to have against the Rams this coming weekend. Just amazing. Amazing. And look where the Seahawks went. Now John Schneider is one of the best GMs in football, and that's the guy that Dan Morgan learned under. But enough on the Seahawks. Except this guy, Marshawn Lynch, he had the Beastquake run. You know who needs to do that for the Panthers? Rico Dowdle. And I'm a sucker for momentum. I say it all the time. I want to see a play like that. I want to see a win over the Rams. I want to see Green Bay Packers ripped sleeve Rico Dowdle. The game where Rico carried the offense. He's done it a couple of times this year. But those games that he had towards the middle of the season where the sleeve is ripped, he looks like Rambo, he's running people over. That is the Rico Dowdle that you're going to need to see come playoff time in the coming days. Here is Dave Canales. They actually had him on the phone after the Falcons-Saints game in which the Falcons gave the Panthers the playoff berth. They're in it now. They called Canales, who we presume, right after talking to Tepper, was facing the media. And he actually did have a conversation with Tepper that he didn't share too much details on. But I think it's exactly what I was talking about previously. It's like these guys are all together. It's Canales, it's Morgan, it's Tepper. You know the deal on that. Let's hear from Canales on one of the main key to victories in this playoff stretch.
What are the challenges and solutions right now that you're maybe seeing for the run game that you guys have?
Just staying connected up front, making sure nobody's running through gaps, and the running back's got to be violent and run through stuff. There's going to be arm tackles. Sometimes they're going to be an extra hat, and that's your guy, and just be violent with it, physical, and make sure we're just getting efficient runs. And I felt like our run game just wasn't efficient. And I can live with that. If you run it twice and you're in third and short, that really helps our third down stuff as well. But yeah, we'll be right back at it. We'll look at whatever opponent comes up and see how we can attack them, because we're going to try to run the ball at some point.
A lot to go into on that statement, but I think generally he wants to see a little bit more from Rico Dowdle, and you're going to need to have a game like that. I know this Rams secondary sucks, and Bryce Young should have his way against Emmanuel Forbes or whatever corners they're putting out there. And the Rams haven't been as hot as they were previously during the season. It's a good matchup for the Panthers, generally speaking. And I think Young is going to have opportunities 100%. You're going to need a lot from Dowdle still. You're going to need to be balanced. And he calls the arm tackles out specifically. I think if you were watching that Seahawks game, I gave a lot of credit to Witherspoon, the corner, some of the big corners they have there in Seattle that are great tacklers. Great tacklers. But some people commented and they go, he needs to break those tackles. And then you watch the game against the Bucs, and Dowdle had, I think, a particularly bad game. A bad game. And I don't know if he's fighting through injury. I don't know if maybe he's run down a little bit, literally, after taking on so much of the workload earlier this season. Whether it's Hubbard or Dowdle, you're going to need to get a lot from those guys. Run over tacklers, break tackles, don't let arm tackles bring you down. Carry the load. It's going to be a key to victory. And for Canales, you get this championship moment. I mean, how many times has he used that phrase? And in that quote, he says, we'll try to run at some point. No, Dave. Establish the run. This is who you are. The Panthers run the ball, stop the run. I'm confident they can stop the run. Aside from the first drive against the Bucs, the Panthers were good stopping the run in that game. Bucky did not kill them down the stretch. I thought he was going to, because on the first drive, I think he had 4.8 yards per carry. He finished the game with 3.5. They've been good stopping the run. Now let's let Dowdle do what he's done previously this year, which is really take the game by the reins. And this Rams team, man, I'm telling you, it was close in that game against the Cardinals on Sunday. They ended up running away with it and figuring it out. But teams have been able to score. The Falcons beat the Rams. Hopefully, the Panthers take advantage of that, and hopefully Canales is able to go in his bag a little bit more. And that's how I believe Miss Carolina Blitz put it. Going into the game against the Bucs, she said she wanted to see Canales go into his bag more, which is, she asked the question during the press conference, but I think I heard her saying it in another clip as well. It means we want to see something super creative. We want to see the best stuff from Canales. We need to see elite play design, not the flea flicker. Again, not the flea flicker that I know some people go, Tone, if they executed it, it would have been a good call. I saw some people commenting that. Love you, mean it. I couldn't disagree more. It was terrible weather. So one, they can't even get footing in that game against the Bucs. They can't get their feet under them. It's so rainy. It's a swamp in Florida. Next, you have Rico Dowdle, who's pivotal on that play. He's been struggling the whole game. Visibly just distraught, looked a little bit out of it on the sideline when they showed him. I know he had a lot at play. I think he had $1 million incentives hitched on that game. Maybe that got in his head. Maybe it was injury. I don't know. Third, has this offense even executed a flea flicker? So McDaniels and the Patriots, they did it on Sunday against the Dolphins. McDaniels has ran that play for a decade. Drake May is the MVP candidate. Travion Henderson's playing out of his mind. In bad conditions, you're going to trust an offense that maybe has never even ran this play aside from doing it once in practice or something. And maybe I don't have the insider knowledge. I'm not watching them practice the play, but it's like, has this ever been something that they have shown you? Have they ever shown you a play like that? And I think the most important point on why that was a bad play and why I think Canales is at its best when he's getting receivers open, getting favorable matchups, like he did in that Rams game with Jalen Coker. Or it wasn't the Rams game, it was the Bucs game, the first Bucs game, where he did the route with Coker between the C gap, got him wide open in the middle of the field. Young literally just had to toss it to him and he was open. Straight play call that got Coker open on that. He needs plays like that against the Rams. No dumb flea flickers. Especially when your quarterback was making throws, and if it weren't for an OPI, you would have been driving in enemy territory and maybe come away with a touchdown. You didn't need to go into the flea flicker section of the playbook. You didn't need to go and open the back of the playbook to get yards in that game. You didn't. With the way Young was throwing it towards the end of the game. You did not need the flea flicker. And I really hope Canales, who learned under Pete Carroll, clearly that's his guy. And I will say it, I'm on record, off-season content, so stick with the Tone during the off-season. We'll be covering the team as much as we do now. I don't think he is capable of doing that all he is asked to do. Play calling, develop the wide receivers, sit at the table with Dan Morgan in the front office, take calls from Tepper, manage this young team that really has an absence of leaders. Yes, you have some veterans like Derek Brown and J.C. Horn and Taylor Moat and guys who have been here. It's a young team, a really young team that's developing. And I think you can sometimes see the immaturity with this team. I'm not saying they're immature. I think there's just some points where you're like, man, sometimes they just don't get it. Whether it's a dumb roughness call or a penalty, a taunting from Mike Jackson, the face mask from JC Horny's laughing after the game, whatever it is. Things like that. Canales is so in over his head in responsibility, and then comes Sunday, he's calling the plays. He's not like Pete Carroll with a 20-pound wad of gum in his mouth on the sideline just like chewing and like looking on the field with his hands on his knees like a personal trainer. No, he's in the playbook, innovating. I think sometimes for that reason he fails to understand game flow and like basic in-game management things. And look, every great play caller does that. Andy Reid, how many times did he butcher the time management? The clock management at the end of the games. He's been notoriously bad at doing that. Why? Because his face is buried in the Cheesecake Factory menu, which is the Chiefs playbook. And sometimes you forget about those things. Well, all that for Canales, he needs to be on. He needs to be dialed in. Dialed in. And Rico Dowdle needs to find his Riz. His Riz. He needs to be ripped sleeve Rico Dowdle. He needs to riz him up. I wanted to use that word in today's show. I thought of that earlier at the gym. I'm like, I'm gonna work that in. He needs to be Rizzo Dowdle. He needs to look sick with the face paint on. He needs to go out there and riz these dudes up. They need to be jaw dropping, falling over on their knees for Rico Dowdle as he plows his way into the end zone for a touchdown. That's what you need to see from this run game in the championship moment. It's like, you know what? I'm getting so done with the championship moment crap. Even though they're in the playoffs, can we just like leave that language in 2025? I'm getting so sick and tired of it because it's like everything's a championship moment. For Canales, he's been saying it since week 3. And that's a little bit hyperbole, but stick with me. Everything's a championship moment. It's like they go into the dining hall on Mint Street and they look at the fettuccine Alfredo, and then there's a chicken breast on the side. They go, this is a championship moment. I'm going to take the chicken breast. Chicken breast and broccoli, championship moment. And that's the plate they take. It's like everything. I'm like walking around my house. I'm like, I could sit on the couch and go on Instagram, or I could go for a walk outside and put the phone down. Championship moment. I could go to the gym, or I could stuff my face with white cheddar popcorn. Championship moment. Championship moment. Championship moment. Championship moment. This is The Tone. Thank you so much for tuning in. More for you tomorrow. We're going to go more into the game itself, but let's go. Let's go, Panthers. It's The Tone.